The Apache chief's blind daughter was ignored, but a cowboy unwittingly changed her fate. In the small clay and wood hut at the edge of the settlement, a baby girl had entered the world. Her parents, the chief and his wife, were overjoyed to see her tiny fingers curling around their own, but there was a shadow over their joy. The midwife, a wise elder of the village, shook her head gently. "She cannot see," she whispered, her voice tinged with sadness. The chief's heart ached, but he held his daughter close, promising silently that he would protect her, guide her, and help her find her place in the world, even if it seemed uncertain. The child was named Naeli, which meant, "I love you," in the language of her people. Her parents' love for her was immense, yet the reality of her blindness made life in the village challenging. The Apache people were strong and resourceful, living close to the land, and depending on sharp senses and keen sight to survive. Hunting, gathering, and navigating the rugged landscape were essential skills. The other children learned to run, track animals, and follow the shifting paths of the sun and stars. Naeli, however, could not see the world around her, and because of this, many villagers treated her differently. She was not included in the children's games, nor was she expected to learn the skills that defined their way of life. Despite this, Naeli's mind was active and curious. She learned to listen carefully to everything: the rustle of the wind through the trees, the whispers of her parents, the crackling of the fire. Sounds became her guide, and her other senses seemed to grow sharper with each passing day. She could feel the difference between soft moss and rough bark with her tiny fingers, recognize the smell of wild herbs and flowers, and detect subtle shifts in the air that indicated approaching storms. While the villagers overlooked her, Naeli quietly absorbed everything around her. She learned the rhythm of life in the village, the patterns of the river, and even the habits of the animals that roamed nearby. Her mother, though concerned about her daughter's blindness, was determined to nurture her. She would sit with Naeli for hours, describing everything in vivid detail. "See how the sunlight dances across the river," she would say, even though Naeli could not see it. "Listen to the song of the birds. Each one is telling a story." Naeli learned to create pictures in her mind from these words, imagining scenes so real that she sometimes forgot she could not see them. Her father, the chief, often told stories of their ancestors around the fire. Naeli would sit close, listening to tales of bravery, wisdom, and survival. Though she could not witness these adventures firsthand, the stories filled her mind with wonder and a longing to explore the world beyond her hut. Life, however, was not easy. Many villagers saw Naeli's blindness as a limitation. They worried she would never contribute to the community in the same way others could. Some were impatient with her, assuming she could not learn or understand the ways of the tribe. At times, their words hurt more than any physical struggle could. Yet, Naeli was resilient. She learned not to let the whispers and doubts of others define her. In her own quiet way, she began to explore her abilities. She developed a keen sense of direction by memorizing the sounds and textures of the village paths. She learned to identify each person by the sound of their footsteps or the rhythm of their breathing. Her memory was remarkable. She could recall details of conversations, lessons, and stories that others forgot. Even though she could not see, Naeli had a spirit that could not be ignored entirely. Her laughter, bright and musical, would echo across the village, reminding people of the joy that existed even in the face of hardship. Sometimes, she would sing softly to herself, crafting melodies she had learned from her mother or the birds outside. These small acts of life and creativity gradually began to earn her respect from a few villagers, though many still underestimated her. The seasons changed, and with them, Naeli grew. She learned to navigate the village with confidence, relying on her acute senses and memory. The river became her constant companion. She would sit beside it for hours, feeling the water rush over her hands, listening to the stories the current seemed to tell. She learned the sounds of different animals, the soft padding of a deer, the skittering of a rabbit, the distant howl of a coyote, and began to understand their habits. While the children ran and played games that required sight, Nayeli developed a deep understanding of the world in her own way, a knowledge that was subtle but profound. Her curiosity often led her beyond the village. Sometimes she would follow the sound of a stream or the rustle of leaves, exploring small hills and valleys near her home. The elders warned her to be careful, but she learned to move with caution and awareness. She developed a sense of the landscape that was almost magical in its precision. Even without sight, she could tell when the wind shifted, when rain was coming, and when someone approached her. The world, though invisible, became a rich tapestry of sound, touch, and scent, a tapestry Nayeli could navigate with skill and confidence. Despite these personal victories, there were moments of loneliness. Nayeli longed for someone to see her not as a blind girl, but as a person with talent, intelligence, and dreams. She watched other children play from the shadows, imagining what it would be like to run freely, to explore without limitation. At night, she would lie beside her parents, listening to the crackle of the fire and the distant songs of the night birds, and dream of a life where she was not defined by her blindness. Her parents, aware of her longing, reassured her constantly, encouraging her to embrace her strengths. "Your eyes may not see," her mother said, "but your heart and mind can understand more than most can ever imagine." It was during these quiet moments that Nayeli's character began to take shape. She learned patience, observation, and a deep empathy for others. She could sense emotions through tone of voice and subtle gestures, and she began to understand the unspoken ways people communicated. These skills made her wise beyond her years, even if the villagers had yet to recognize it. In the safety of her family's love, Nayeli's potential quietly grew, like a seed waiting for sunlight. Her early life, though filled with challenges, laid the foundation for the remarkable person she would become. While others dismissed her, Nayeli cultivated a strength that no one could see but that would one day make her extraordinary. The world may have overlooked her at first, but in her mind and heart, she imagined possibilities that stretched far beyond the limitations imposed by sight. She learned to find beauty in the world without needing to see it, discovering that listening, feeling, and understanding could be as powerful as sight itself. The story of Nayeli's childhood is not one of despair, but of quiet triumph. It is a story of love, patience, and inner strength. In a village where the blind were often ignored, Nayeli's spirit refused to be hidden. She learned to move through the world with grace, curiosity, and courage, building a life that hinted at the extraordinary journey yet to come. Her story reminds us that sometimes the greatest abilities are those that are not immediately visible, and the smallest acts of understanding and encouragement can shape a life in ways the world cannot yet imagine. As she grew older, Nayeli's heart remained full of wonder. She began to sense that her life, though different, was filled with potential. She would spend long hours listening to the stories of her ancestors, imagining their adventures and dreaming of her own. Little did she know that her life was about to change in ways she could never have predicted, all because of the kindness and insight of someone who would arrive in her world like a breeze through the trees, unexpected, gentle, and life-altering. Life in the Apache village continued its quiet rhythm, with the seasons bringing both challenges and beauty. Nayeli had grown into a thoughtful and strong-willed young girl, her senses finely tuned to the sounds, smells, and textures of her surroundings. Despite her curiosity and intelligence, many of the villagers still overlooked her. They saw her blindness as a barrier, a limitation that set her apart from the rest of the children and even the adults who were expected to contribute to the life of the tribe. Nayeli often felt a subtle loneliness, a longing to be seen as more than just the blind girl. It was during one of the long, sun-drenched summers that the village received a visitor. A lone cowboy, rugged and weathered from long travels, rode into the clearing outside the settlement. His name was Sam, a man who carried with him the air of the open plains, the smell of dust and leather, and a sense of independence that made the villagers wary. Cowboys and outsiders rarely entered the Apache lands, and many were met with suspicion. Sam was no different. His arrival caused a ripple of curiosity, caution, and quiet gossip among the people. Sam did not come to the village with any intention to change lives. He had his own path to follow, driven by the winds of adventure and the need to travel. But fate has a way of connecting people in ways no one expects. When Sam first saw Naomi, she was sitting near the riverbank, listening to the flowing water and tracing the rough bark of a tree with her fingers. Her hair glinted in the sunlight, and her posture, though delicate, carried a quiet confidence. Sam noticed her presence, something about the way she listened so intently, as if the world were speaking directly to her, drew him closer. Curious, Sam approached her gently, speaking in a soft tone. "Hello there," he said, tipping his worn hat. Naomi turned her face toward him, her hands instinctively reaching out to understand who was there. I'm Naomi," she replied, her voice steady but cautious. Sam introduced himself, and in that simple exchange, a bridge began to form between them, a bridge built on curiosity and respect rather than pity. Unlike the villagers who had always seen her blindness as a limitation, Sam treated Naomi as an equal. He spoke to her directly, asked her questions, and listened carefully to her answers. He did not over-explain, nor did he assume she could not understand the world. Naomi, in turn, was intrigued by this stranger who seemed to look beyond her disability. She had encountered people before who either pitied her or ignored her completely, but Sam's approach was different. He acknowledged her abilities and treated her with the same respect he would offer anyone. Over the following days, Sam returned to the village frequently, always finding ways to interact with Naomi. They spent time near the river, where he would describe the way sunlight danced on the water, the subtle shifts in the wind, and the distant shapes of hills and trees. Naomi listened intently, imagining the world through his words. She began to ask questions about things she had never thought of before, the way clouds moved, the way the earth smelled after rain, the patterns of animal tracks in the mud. Sam encouraged her curiosity, answering her questions patiently, and often turning the conversation back to her thoughts and observations. The villagers noticed this growing bond and were puzzled. Why did Sam spend so much time with Naomi? Some whispered that he must have a purpose, perhaps even a reason to teach her something practical. Others simply shook their heads, unable to understand why a stranger would pay attention to someone they had long overlooked. Naomi herself, though aware of the murmurs, felt only a growing sense of excitement and possibility. For the first time in her life, she felt that her potential was being recognized and nurtured. Sam began teaching Naomi ways to explore the world safely. He showed her how to use her heightened senses to navigate the landscape. "Listen to the wind," he said one afternoon. "It will tell you which direction is north." He guided her hands over the textures of different rocks, helping her understand the variations between smooth stones, jagged surfaces, and soft earth. He taught her to follow the sounds of water, to notice the subtle differences in bird calls, and to sense the presence of animals before they appeared. What started as casual lessons grew into a remarkable mentorship, though Sam himself never fully realized the magnitude of what he was doing for her. One day, Sam suggested something extraordinary: riding a horse. Naomi had always been fascinated by horses, having heard the thundering of hooves and the soft nickers of foals from a distance. Many villagers assumed a blind girl could never ride safely, but Sam refused to see her disability as an obstacle. Carefully, he guided her onto a gentle horse named Dusty, letting her feel the rise and fall of the animal's body beneath her. Step by step, he taught her to move with the rhythm of the horse, to feel its breathing, and to respond to subtle shifts in balance. Nayeli listened, concentrated, and gradually found a harmony with the horse that astonished even Sam. Word of Nayeli's growing abilities began to spread. A few villagers watched her from a distance, amazed at how confidently she navigated the horse. Some approached with caution, offering tentative praise. Nayeli had not sought recognition, but the acknowledgement of her skill was a balm to her spirit. She realized that even though the world often overlooked her, she could carve her own path, guided by her own strengths. The bond between Nayeli and Sam deepened, not in a romantic sense, but as a connection of understanding and trust. Sam did not know it, but he had become a catalyst for her transformation. By treating her as capable, by engaging her mind and senses, he unlocked a confidence within her that had lain dormant for years. Nayeli began to take risks she would never have considered before, exploring areas of the village and surrounding lands with a new sense of courage. She learned to trust her instincts and her memory, realizing that the world, while challenging, could be navigated successfully even without sight. As summer days turned into the cooler months, Nayeli continued to grow stronger, more independent and more observant. She developed a unique perspective on life, blending her acute awareness of sounds, textures, and smells with the knowledge Sam had shared. She could identify the approach of storms, sense when animals were nearby, and even detect subtle changes in the behavior of people around her. Her intelligence and adaptability became more apparent with each passing day. The villagers who had once ignored her began to notice a change. Nayeli was no longer just the blind girl. They saw her confidence, her skills, and her unique understanding of the world. While some remained skeptical, others began to respect her growing abilities. Yet it was Sam's presence, his unintentional guidance, and the way he treated her as a capable individual that had ignited this transformation. Nayeli had begun to see herself not through the lens of limitation, but through the lens of possibility. Through this time, Nayeli also learned valuable lessons about patience, trust, and observation. She realized that life's challenges were not always barriers but opportunities to discover inner strength. She learned to adapt, to find creative solutions, and to trust her instincts. With Sam's guidance, she discovered that disability was not inability. It was simply a different way of experiencing the world. Her mind, imagination, and intuition became her greatest tools, allowing her to interact with life in ways others could not. By the time Sam's travels took him beyond the village, Nayeli had changed in ways that no one could have predicted. She had grown from a girl who was often overlooked and underestimated into someone who carried herself with quiet confidence, resilience, and curiosity. She had learned that the world, while sometimes indifferent, could be navigated successfully with patience, awareness, and determination. The lessons she absorbed during this period would serve as the foundation for her remarkable journey ahead. Sam's influence on Nayeli was subtle but powerful. He did not claim to be a teacher or mentor. He simply treated her as an equal human being, recognizing her abilities rather than her disability. Yet, through his words, guidance, and presence, Nayeli discovered a world of possibilities she had never imagined. She learned that even small acts of acknowledgement and encouragement could have a profound impact, changing not only how others saw her, but how she saw herself. Nayeli's life in the village continued, but the spark that Sam had ignited would never fade. She had learned to combine her acute senses with courage, creativity, and determination. She began to see herself not as someone limited by blindness, but as someone capable of extraordinary achievements. Though the cowboy had left, the lessons remained, shaping her perception, skills, and understanding of the world. In these months, Nayeli's story began to shift. She was no longer merely a child overlooked by her people. She was a young girl discovering her strengths, gaining recognition, and imagining possibilities beyond what anyone had expected. Her relationship with Sam had opened a door to a world that had once seemed unreachable, and she stepped through it with courage, curiosity, and hope. This period of her life, filled with discovery and growth, set the stage for the incredible journey that awaited her, a journey that would eventually prove to the world that blindness was not a limitation, but simply a different way of seeing and experiencing life. As time passed, Naomi's life in the Apache village had begun to change in ways she could scarcely have imagined. Her days were no longer filled solely with the quiet observation of her surroundings. They now included a sense of purpose and growing independence. The lessons she had learned from Sam, the wandering cowboy who had treated her as capable and respected her abilities, had opened a new world to her. With his guidance still echoing in her mind, Naomi began to push boundaries that once seemed impossible, exploring both the physical and emotional landscapes of her life. One morning, as the sun rose and painted the sky in hues of orange and gold, Naomi sat by the river, listening to its steady flow. She had learned to read the subtle differences in the water's sound, which told her not only the direction of the current, but also hinted at the weather ahead. She could feel the vibrations through the earth as animals moved nearby and could distinguish between the gentle steps of a deer and the heavier thuds of a horse. This skill, once unnoticed and unappreciated, had become a source of pride for her. Naomi realized that her blindness, which many considered a limitation, had actually sharpened her other senses, giving her a perspective that others lacked. The villagers, who had once doubted her abilities, began to notice her growing competence. She could navigate the terrain with astonishing accuracy, even venturing further from the village than most children dared. When hunters returned from the forest or mountains, Naomi could describe details of the landscape, the movement of animals, and the patterns of the wind, all from what she had observed through touch, sound, and smell. People began to whisper among themselves, curiosity replacing doubt, as they realized that Naomi's understanding of the land was unique and remarkable. One day, an unusual challenge arrived. A young fawn had become trapped in a narrow ravine near the edge of the village. The villagers attempted to rescue it, but the steep, slippery rocks made the task dangerous. Naomi, who had been observing from a distance, stepped forward with quiet confidence. Guided by her acute senses and knowledge of animal behavior, she carefully approached the fawn, speaking softly to keep it calm. She instructed the villagers on where to hold ropes and how to steady the fawn without frightening it further. Using her intuition and careful guidance, Naomi led the rescue, and the fawn was safely brought back to its mother. The villagers were astonished. The blind girl had accomplished what many thought impossible, and for the first time, her abilities were fully recognized by the majority of the community. Naomi's confidence grew steadily after that day. She began to explore beyond the familiar paths of the village, venturing into the hills, valleys, and forests with careful precision. She learned to follow the subtle shifts in wind and scent, which indicated the presence of animals, changes in weather, or approaching travelers. Her mind, sharp and inquisitive, mapped the landscape in a way that was almost tangible to her. Each journey was a new adventure, a test of her skills, and an opportunity to learn more about the world she had once only imagined. It was during one of these excursions that Naomi experienced her first true encounter with the wider world beyond her village. She was following the sound of a stream deep into the forest when she heard the unmistakable crunch of hooves on leaves and twigs. A group of traders, traveling on horseback, had entered the territory. Most people would have been frightened by the sudden appearance of strangers, but Naomi's training had prepared her for such moments. She remained calm, carefully listening to their movements and estimating their distance. When the traders called out, she responded confidently, introducing herself and explaining her presence. Her voice, calm and assured, immediately caught their attention. The traders were surprised that a young girl, blind and alone, had not only found them but also seemed unafraid. They spoke with her, asking questions about the village, the land, and her life. Naeli answered with clarity and insight, describing the forest, the river, and the surrounding hills in vivid detail. The traders were impressed, realizing that her understanding of the land was far beyond what one would expect from someone so young, let alone someone without sight. They shared stories of their travels and adventures, and Naeli absorbed every word, adding new knowledge to her ever-growing understanding of the world. Back in the village, the recognition of Naeli's abilities continued to spread. Elders who had once doubted her began to seek her guidance on matters related to the land, the animals, and even navigation. She started teaching younger children, helping them understand the ways of nature through sound, touch, and observation. Her unique perspective allowed her to explain things in ways that others could not. Children who had once ignored her began to listen, fascinated by her stories and demonstrations. Naeli, who had once been overlooked, was slowly becoming a respected figure in her community. However, it was not just her physical abilities that had grown. Naeli's inner strength and emotional awareness were also developing. She had learned patience, empathy, and resilience. By observing the people around her, she could sense their emotions, fears, and intentions. This gave her an insight into human nature that was rare for someone of her age. She began to mediate small disputes, offer comfort to those in distress, and provide guidance to those who were lost or uncertain. Her presence became a source of calm and reassurance in the village. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of pink and purple, Naeli sat with her father near the fire. The chief had always loved his daughter deeply, but he was now beginning to see her in a new light. "Naeli," he said, his voice full of pride, "you have a gift that no one else possesses. You see the world in a way that others cannot, and you teach us to notice things we have long overlooked. You are wise beyond your years." Naeli smiled, feeling the warmth of her father's words. She had never thought of herself as extraordinary, but the acknowledgement of her family and the villagers gave her a new sense of purpose. It was during this time that Naeli also began to understand the lessons Sam had imparted to her, even after he had moved on. She realized that his simple acts of recognition, encouragement, and respect had given her the courage to explore her abilities. By treating her as capable, he had shown her that her blindness was not a limitation, but simply a different way of experiencing the world. This realization filled her with gratitude and a sense of responsibility. She wanted to share what she had learned, not only with her village but with anyone willing to listen. Naeli's exploration and growing confidence eventually led her to attempt something truly remarkable. She decided to journey alone to a distant hill she had often heard described in the elders' stories. The hill was said to provide a breathtaking view of the entire valley, a vantage point that few villagers had ever reached. Most would have assumed a blind girl could never make the journey safely. Naeli, however, relied on her memory of the terrain, her acute senses, and her intuition. Step by step, she made her way through the forest, feeling the ground beneath her, listening to the sounds of the wind and wildlife, and imagining the landscape around her. When she reached the top of the hill, she stood in awe, though she could not see the view. The wind carried the scents of distant flowers and the earthy aroma of the valley below. Birds called from afar, and the river sang its familiar song as it wound through the land. Naeli felt a profound connection to the world around her. She had conquered a challenge that many thought impossible, proving not only her physical abilities but also her determination and courage. In that moment, she understood that her blindness did not define her. Her strength, wisdom, and resilience did. From that day forward, Naeli's life took on a new rhythm. She continued to explore, teach, and guide others, earning the respect and admiration of the villagers. Her reputation began to spread beyond the village, as travelers and traders who met her would carry stories of the remarkable blind girl who understood the land better than anyone else. Naeli had become more than just a girl living in the shadow of her disability. She had become a symbol of possibility, courage, and intelligence. Yet, Naeli remained humble. She knew that her abilities were not a gift of sight but a product of curiosity, learning, and determination. She continued to explore, to listen, and to teach, always seeking new knowledge and experiences. Her connection to the land deepened with each passing day, and her understanding of people became even more profound. Naeli's journey, which had begun with quiet observation and the guidance of a kind cowboy, was now reaching new heights, setting the stage for even greater challenges and remarkable achievements in the future. Her story at this point is a testament to the power of encouragement, recognition, and self-belief. Naeli had grown from a child overlooked into a young girl capable of extraordinary insight and action. The world, once limited in her eyes, had opened up to her through patience, determination, and the support of those who saw her true potential. She had learned that sometimes, the greatest accomplishments begin not with sight, but with the courage to trust oneself and the wisdom to listen, observe, and act. Naeli's life, filled with exploration, learning, and growing independence, had become a living example of resilience and possibility. She had begun to understand that true strength comes from within, and that the world responds to those who are willing to see beyond limitations. Her journey was only beginning, and the lessons she had learned would guide her through the challenges and opportunities that awaited her in the days to come. As the years passed, Naeli continued to grow in skill, confidence, and wisdom. Her life had changed in countless ways since the days when she had been ignored as the blind daughter of the Apache chief. The lessons from Sam, the cowboy who had recognized her abilities, had left a lasting impression. She had learned to trust herself, to explore the world with curiosity, and to navigate challenges with courage. But life, as it often does, had a way of presenting challenges far greater than any she had faced before, challenges that would test her heart, her mind, and the very limits of her abilities. It began one autumn, when the village was preparing for the annual harvest festival. The air was crisp, filled with the smell of pine and the earthy aroma of fallen leaves. The villagers were busy with their work, gathering crops, tending to animals, and making preparations for the celebrations. Naeli, now a young woman, moved gracefully among them, her senses finely tuned to the rhythm of village life. She could hear the subtle differences in the sound of the soil as people worked, the faint rustle of animal movements, and the gentle murmur of conversation. Though her eyes could not see, her awareness of the world was extraordinary. It was during one of her regular walks near the river that Naeli first sensed something unusual. The wind carried a scent she did not recognize, a mixture of smoke and iron, and the distant crack of hooves sounded sharper than normal. Her instincts told her that travelers were approaching, but there was something different about this group. They did not move with the ease and familiarity of traders or visitors. Their movements were cautious, tense, and filled with an energy that made her uneasy. Naeli's heart quickened as she listened, sensing that this encounter could be dangerous. As the group came closer, Naeli realized that they were not ordinary travelers. They were outsiders with unfamiliar clothing, strange language, and an air of authority. Some carried tools and equipment that indicated they had come with a purpose beyond trade or casual visit. The villagers, noticing the newcomers, became tense. Whispers spread quickly through the settlement, and the elders gathered to discuss what should be done. Naeli, attuned to the subtleties others often overlooked, sensed the growing fear and uncertainty. She knew that her unique perspective could help the village navigate this situation. Naeli decided to approach the group. Guided by the sound of their voices and the movement of their horses, she stepped forward, speaking with calm authority. "I am Naeli," she said, her voice steady and clear. "What brings you to our village?" The outsiders were taken aback. They had not expected a young girl, blind and unaccompanied, to greet them with such confidence. One of the men, who appeared to be their leader, answered cautiously, explaining that they were surveying the land and gathering information for purposes they could not fully disclose. Naeli listened carefully, picking up nuances in their tone, hesitation, and choice of words. She sensed that their intentions might not be entirely friendly. Returning to the village, Naeli relayed what she had observed. She described the strangers' movements, their voices, and even the subtle cues that indicated their attitude and intentions. The elders were impressed and began to consider her guidance seriously. For the first time in her life, Naeli's insights were not just valued, they were essential. The villagers, who had once doubted her, now relied on her understanding to make critical decisions about how to respond to the newcomers. Over the next few days, the situation grew more complicated. The outsiders moved closer to the village, exploring the surrounding lands. Naeli took it upon herself to track their movements, using the skills she had honed over years of careful observation and practice. She listened to the slightest changes in the wind, the distant sounds of hooves, and even the subtle echoes of their voices across the hills. Her ability to navigate the terrain without sight allowed her to move stealthily, gathering information that no one else could. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the village, Naeli discovered that the outsiders planned to approach the village at night. She could hear them discussing their intentions, unaware that the blind girl was listening from a safe distance. Panic began to rise among the villagers as word of the impending approach spread. They were unprepared for a confrontation, and fear threatened to overwhelm them. Naeli, however, remained calm. She had faced challenges before, and she knew that fear could cloud judgment. Drawing on her experience and inner strength, she devised a plan to protect her people. Naeli guided the villagers in creating subtle defenses around the village, using natural obstacles, sound signals, and strategic positioning. She instructed the hunters on how to use the terrain to their advantage and coordinated a watch system to detect movement. The villagers, though initially hesitant, trusted her judgment and followed her guidance. For the first time, Naeli's knowledge, patience, and courage became a unifying force for the entire community. The night of the approach arrived, and the outsiders moved stealthily toward the village. Naeli, positioned on a small rise overlooking the settlement, listened intently to their movements. She could sense their proximity, anticipate their actions, and relay instructions to the villagers below. The tension was palpable, and every sound seemed amplified in the quiet night. The villagers, following Naeli's guidance, were able to prepare themselves effectively without revealing their positions. When the outsiders entered the village perimeter, they were met with subtle yet effective resistance. Traps and obstacles, carefully arranged under Naeli's direction, slowed their progress. The villagers, guided by her clear instructions, moved with precision, ensuring that no one was harmed while making the village appear more formidable than it actually was. Naeli's keen awareness allowed her to anticipate the outsiders' actions, and her calm presence reassured the villagers, preventing panic and confusion. The confrontation continued for hours, with Naeli coordinating from her vantage point. Her acute senses and careful planning ensured that the village remained safe. The outsiders, frustrated and unable to navigate the defenses, eventually decided to retreat, leaving the settlement unharmed. When the dawn broke, casting light on the quiet village, the villagers celebrated their safety, and their gratitude toward Naeli was immense. She had not only protected them but had done so with a wisdom and composure that exceeded anyone's expectations. In the days that followed, the village's perception of Naeli changed forever. She was no longer seen merely as the chief's blind daughter but as a leader, a strategist, and a guardian. Her insights, courage, and guidance had saved the community from potential harm. Elders and villagers alike sought her advice on a variety of matters, recognizing her unique ability to perceive the world in ways others could not. Naeli, however, remained humble, knowing that her strength lay not in pride but in understanding, patience, and the careful application of her skills. This period of intense challenge also strengthened Naeli's inner resolve. She realized that life was unpredictable, and that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to act wisely despite it. Her blindness, once seen as a limitation, had given her an extraordinary advantage: the ability to observe, listen, and anticipate with a depth that others could not match. Naeli began to understand that her life was a gift, not in spite of her blindness, but because it allowed her to develop talents and insights that were rare and valuable. Naeli's reputation began to spread beyond the village. Travelers, traders, and neighboring tribes heard of the blind girl who had outwitted outsiders and protected her people. Stories of her courage, intelligence, and unique abilities reached far and wide, transforming her from a young girl overlooked by her community into a figure of inspiration and respect. People marveled not at her blindness, but at her extraordinary skills, her wisdom, and her unwavering spirit. Through these experiences, Naeli also discovered a profound truth about life: that recognition and respect are often earned not through appearance or conventional abilities, but through courage, integrity, and the willingness to act for the greater good. She learned that even those who seem powerless can influence the world in ways others might never imagine. Naeli's journey had brought her from a quiet, overlooked child into a young woman whose presence commanded attention, respect, and admiration. Yet, despite her growing reputation and achievements, Naeli remained connected to her roots. She continued to explore the land, teach the younger children, and guide her people with patience and wisdom. Her experiences with danger and responsibility had strengthened her understanding of the world, not just as a physical landscape to navigate, but as a complex web of relationships, emotions, and challenges. Naeli had become a living example of resilience, courage, and the transformative power of encouragement and belief in one's abilities. In reflecting on these events, Naeli often thought of Sam, the cowboy who had unknowingly set her on this path. His simple acts of recognition, his respect, and his willingness to treat her as capable had ignited a spark that had grown into a guiding light. She understood that the kindness and faith of one person could change the course of a life, opening doors to opportunities and growth that might otherwise remain closed. Sam's influence had taught her that sometimes the world does not need someone to see your eyes, it only needs someone to see your potential. This chapter of Naeli's life marked a turning point. She had faced danger, guided her community, and discovered her inner strength. The girl who had once been ignored because of her blindness had become a leader, a protector, and a symbol of courage. Her journey was far from over, but the experiences of this time had shaped her into a remarkable individual whose story would inspire generations to come. Naeli had proven that adversity, when met with wisdom, determination, and courage, could transform not only the individual but the world around them. The years had passed, and Naeli had grown into a young woman whose presence was felt far beyond the boundaries of her Apache village. She was no longer simply the blind daughter of the chief. She had become a guide, a teacher, and a symbol of courage and wisdom. Her life had been shaped by challenges, encouragement, and the remarkable people she had met along the way, particularly Sam, the cowboy who had once seen her abilities when no one else did. But it was not only the guidance of others that had shaped her. It was her own determination, insight, and resilience that had transformed her story into one worth remembering. The village had changed as well. Naomi's influence had grown steadily, not because she sought recognition, but because she had earned respect through her actions and the quiet strength of her character. Children followed her teachings, learning to navigate the land with awareness, patience, and understanding. They learned to listen, to observe, and to respect the natural world in a way that had been taught to Naomi by both her elders and the lessons she had discovered herself. Her approach was gentle yet firm, guiding them to see beyond superficial appearances and to recognize the potential in themselves and in others. Travelers and neighboring tribes had begun to visit the village, drawn by stories of the remarkable blind girl who had grown into a wise and capable young woman. Naomi welcomed them with the same kindness and curiosity that had always defined her. She would listen to their stories, learn from their experiences, and share her knowledge of the land, animals, and community life. People were fascinated not only by her abilities but by her perspective, which allowed them to see the world in ways they had never considered. Naomi's wisdom was not taught through force or authority. It was shared through understanding, patience, and the example of her own life. Despite the growing attention and admiration, Naomi remained humble. She knew that her accomplishments were not the result of her blindness alone, nor solely because of the guidance she had received. They were the product of dedication, observation, courage, and an unwavering desire to contribute to the well-being of her community. She understood that true strength lay not in the recognition of others, but in the ability to act wisely and compassionately, even when no one was watching. Her humility made her wisdom even more powerful, as people could see that her actions were genuine, motivated by care and understanding rather than ego. As she matured, Naomi began to take on greater responsibilities within the village. She helped the elders plan for seasonal changes, teaching the young people how to prepare for harsh winters and hot summers. She guided hunters and gatherers, offering insights into animal behavior and plant cycles that had been honed through years of careful observation. Her ability to sense changes in the environment before they became obvious gave the village an advantage, allowing them to thrive even during difficult times. Naomi's leadership was quiet but effective, rooted in knowledge, patience, and respect for all living things. One of Naomi's most significant contributions came in the form of education. She began to teach children and young adults who had previously struggled to understand the complexities of the land and community life. Using sound, touch, and vivid descriptions, she created lessons that were both engaging and practical. She taught them to recognize the calls of birds, the tracks of animals, the changes in soil texture, and the subtle shifts in wind direction. She demonstrated how to move quietly and with awareness, how to anticipate nature's rhythms, and how to live in harmony with the world around them. Her students flourished under her guidance, learning skills that would serve them for a lifetime. Naomi also used her growing reputation to foster empathy and understanding among people from different communities. She welcomed outsiders, listened to their experiences, and encouraged her own people to do the same. Through these exchanges, she helped bridge cultural gaps, demonstrating that wisdom and capability are not limited by sight, age, or background. Her ability to communicate with kindness and clarity made her a respected figure not only within her village but in the wider region. Travelers would often speak of her to others, spreading tales of a young woman whose insight and courage were extraordinary. Despite the recognition and respect she received, Naomi never forgot her beginnings. She often reflected on the days when she had been ignored and underestimated. Those experiences had shaped her, instilling a sense of compassion and understanding that would guide her throughout her life. She knew what it felt like to be overlooked, to have potential dismissed, and she resolved to ensure that no one in her community would ever feel invisible or undervalued. Her past became a source of strength, inspiring her to lift others up and create opportunities for them to flourish. Naomi's life was also marked by moments of quiet reflection and connection to the natural world. She would spend hours by the river, feeling the water flow over her hands, listening to the wind in the trees, and absorbing the songs of the birds. These moments reminded her of the beauty of life and the importance of mindfulness and awareness. She understood that true vision is not only physical but also emotional, intellectual, and spiritual. Through her own example, she taught others to see the world with more than just their eyes, to feel it, to understand it, and to respect it in all its complexity. As she grew older, Naomi's story became a source of inspiration for countless people. Her journey demonstrated that adversity, when met with courage, wisdom, and determination, can be transformed into extraordinary opportunity. She had shown that disability was not inability, that being overlooked was not a permanent condition, and that recognition and opportunity often come from the willingness of someone to see the true potential in another person. Naomi's life was a living testament to the power of resilience, empathy, and perseverance. Her connection with Sam, though long past, remained a meaningful part of her story. She often thought of the cowboy who had treated her as capable when no one else did. Though he had left the village and continued his own journey, the lessons he imparted through simple acts of respect and recognition had left an enduring impact. Naomi understood that the kindness of one person could ripple through time, shaping lives in ways that were profound and lasting. This understanding inspired her to continue her work with others, passing on the lessons of encouragement, empathy, and trust. In the later years of her life, Naomi continued to contribute to her community and beyond. She became a storyteller, sharing the history, traditions, and wisdom of her people. She taught the younger generations not only practical skills, but also the importance of integrity, compassion, and awareness. Her presence in the village became a cornerstone of cultural preservation, ensuring that the values, knowledge, and experiences of the Apache people were passed on with care and respect. Naomi's influence extended far beyond practical knowledge. She helped cultivate a culture of respect and inclusion, showing that every person, regardless of their limitations, could contribute meaningfully to the community. She reminded people that abilities come in many forms, and that sometimes the greatest contributions are those that are not immediately visible. Her life became an example of how empathy, patience, and understanding can transform communities, inspire individuals, and create a legacy that endures. In reflecting on her journey, Naomi often considered how far she had come. From the quiet, overlooked child who had listened to the world in silence, to the young woman who had guided her community and inspired countless others, her life had been shaped by courage, opportunity, and the unwavering belief that her abilities mattered. She had faced challenges that seemed insurmountable, yet she had emerged stronger, wiser, and more compassionate than she had ever imagined. Her story was a reminder that sometimes life's most profound lessons come from unexpected sources: a stranger's kindness, a challenge faced with courage, or the simple act of recognizing someone's potential. Naomi had learned that the world is full of possibilities for those who are willing to see beyond limitations, and she had dedicated her life to ensuring that others could discover their own potential as well. As the sun set over the village one evening, casting a warm glow across the land, Naomi sat by the river, listening to the flowing water and the gentle rustle of leaves. Children played nearby, guided by the lessons she had taught them. Elders and neighbors sought her advice, and travelers came to hear her stories. Naomi's heart was full, knowing that her life had become a source of guidance, inspiration, and hope. She had transformed not only her own destiny but the destiny of those around her. The girl who had once been ignored, dismissed, and underestimated had grown into a woman whose influence would be remembered for generations. Her blindness had not been a barrier. It had been a pathway to insight, resilience, and extraordinary achievement. Naomi's story proved that courage, wisdom, and empathy are among the most powerful forces in the world, and that recognition, when offered, can change lives in ways that last forever. Naomi's life left a legacy that transcended her own village. People from distant lands shared her story, inspired by her courage and the example she had set. The lessons she had learned, the wisdom she had gained, and the compassion she had shown became part of the collective memory, ensuring that her influence would continue long after she was gone. She had transformed her own life, but she had also illuminated a path for countless others, showing that limitations are often only the beginning of extraordinary journeys. And so, Naomi's journey reached its fullest expression. From the quiet child sitting by the fire, ignored by those around her, to the courageous and wise young woman guiding her community and inspiring generations, her life was a testament to the power of belief, courage, and perseverance. The world may have initially overlooked her, but Naomi had shown that the human spirit, when nurtured and encouraged, can overcome obstacles, illuminate possibilities, and leave a legacy that inspires all who hear the story. Her story was not simply about blindness. It was about vision in the truest sense, the ability to perceive, understand, and act with wisdom and compassion. Naomi had proven that anyone, regardless of circumstance, can shape their destiny and touch the lives of countless others.